Okay, I think we are ready to start. I have just passed the top of the hour. Thank you everyone for joining us today in our first webinar in our higher education webinar series. Before we get started, I just have a few items to go over. Closed captioning is provided now. You can select the closed captioning icon on the bottom of your Zoom screen, and also in the chat is a link to third-party captioning if you prefer. Today's webinar will be recorded and available afterwards, and we'll send out information how you can access that. All attendee mics are muted to prevent any background noise or distractions. We will be taking questions today, and we will have a scheduled break, so we'll keep you informed of that. We ask that you post your questions in the Q&A, and we'll get to those as we go along, and leave the chat for just general comments, and or if there's any technical issues you're experiencing, please post there. There was an email that went out this morning with handouts for an activity we'll be doing today, and if you hadn't had a chance to open that, I will post the link in the chat to that email so you can download those documents when we get to them. So I'm very happy today to turn the program over to Cheryl Pruitt for some introductions and about today's agenda. Thank you, Cheryl.
Thanks, Rachel, and thanks to all of you that have joined today. We're really happy to be with you. So I'm Cheryl Pruitt, the Director of the Accessible Technology Initiative at the California State University System, and I work at the Office of the Chancellor. We have 23 campuses, about 500,000 students, and 50,000 staff and faculty. So that's a lot of people to bring into our accessibility initiative. And it is, of course, a shared responsibility across the campus. We've been working on this since 2007. So we've had quite a bit of experience in this area, and we hope we can share some useful tips for you today. Let me turn it over to Leon.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Leon McNaught, and I'm the Accessible Technology Initiative Program Manager for the Cal State LA campus. There's 23 campuses in the Cal State LA system, as Cheryl mentioned. So I'd like to provide some perspective about how the accessibility is working at our campus with procurement. And now I think we'll turn it over to our vendor partners on the next slide.
Hello, everybody. My name is Sam Farley. I am an account executive with GoReact. I'll introduce GoReact in a minute, but I'm excited to be working with you. And this is my colleague, Hyrum Denny.
Hello, I'm the Director of Product with Sam, and excited to be here today. Thank you.
Hey, good morning. My name is Jeff Singleton. I'm with a company, a third-party accessibility services company called Converge Accessibility.
Perfect. And then on our next slide, what GoReact is we are a vendor to the CSU Chancellor's Office and for other 23 campuses. GoReact was actually founded by a communications professor from Brigham Young University who was looking for better ways to provide feedback to students. And one thing he really looked at was the ability to build trust and credibility with effective feedback and helping students to improve their skills. And one thing we know is that while we focus a lot on giving input to students, we often miss the awareness that students need. And so you'll see a demo later on in the presentation day of what GoReact is and how we embed time-stamped embedded feedback to video. We work with about 700 colleges, universities, and private institutions across the country. And while our focus has always been in the States, we are now growing internationally with some international partners as well. So we're excited to be partnered with the CSU today in presenting with you. Hyrum is an integral part of that, and he has a lot he's going to share with you. So we're excited to get going. And we also want to introduce you to our partner Converge. So come on back.
Yeah, so good morning. So as mentioned, I'm with my name is Jeff Singleton. I'm with a company called Converge Accessibility. And We provide third-party accessibility services as a consultant. And while we've really, Converge Accessibility itself has been around for less than a year. Those that make up this company have been around for a lot longer. For example, my business partner, Ken Nakata, he's been in this field since the mid 1990s or earlier, and he used to work for the Department of Justice, and he's even had a hand in crafting some of the Section 508 guidelines and a lot of the ADA cases that he's handled and things like that. For my background, I started in accessibility back in the early 2000s as well, so I've got 20 years just in accessibility, not counting the additional IT experience I've had before that. And what's nice about Converge Accessibility, I think, is that we do bring a unique perspective to accessibility consulting, because with my business partner, he has that legal side of things, that viewpoint where he can help. And the other side, I have the technical side. So we have decades of experience. We combine that technical and legal expertise. And we do web accessibility audits, mobile apps, software, hardware, kiosks. There's so many different things that we do. And in addition to that, as I mentioned, we provide litigation and expert witness services. And we also have a product that we've been working on that provides on-demand compliance. And it's also partly an educational product as well. So, and we've worked with CSU many times in the past, and that's one of the reasons we're here to talk about our experience in that as well. So happy to be invited to be here with you all today.
Thanks, Jeff. So I think next we will move into our poll questions, and you know a little bit about us now, and we'd like to know a little bit about you. So Rachel will be deploying the Zoom poll, and what we're asking you is, who are you? Are you an accessibility professional, a procurement professional, IT professional, faculty, student, or another type of affiliation? So if you could take a minute and access one of the radio buttons that best describes you, we would appreciate it. And once you've done that, then Rachel can show us the results. So Rachel, are you getting responses?
Yes, we're up to
Okay.
about 85%. I'll just maybe give 5 more seconds here and go with that. Okay.
Okay.
All right. It looks like the most we have are accessibility professionals,
Mhm.
and we have a few IT professionals and procurement professionals. No students joining us today, 1 faculty and several that have selected other.
Okay, great. Well, we're glad that all of you are here, and we'll then move on to the next poll question that speaks to what aspect of this endeavor you're involved in. Are you acquiring accessible products, reviewing the accessibility documentation, consulting with vendors, doing product accessibility testing, or maybe you're involved with the equal effective alternate access planning? Because we're not yet able to buy the 100% accessible product. But we're working on it.
There's a comment in the chat that it's all of the above. Was not an option. So, all right. I'll give maybe about 5 more seconds here. Looks like we have a couple still coming in.
And that all of the above is actually, I think, one of the big challenges that we face. It's hard to really get your head around how much work this really is.
Okay, so close that poll out. It looks like we were tied, 25% there for acquiring accessibility products and reviewing accessibility documentation. 35% at product accessibility testing, so lots of testers on. And consulting with vendors, we have 15%.
And we're kind of lacking in the equally effective alternate access planning, which is a really important area, and we will be talking a little bit about that today. But thank you for participating in that, so we can know more about you. And now I'd like to hand it over to Leon.
Thanks, Cheryl. So this slide, implementing CSU accessible procurement, has some points to consider when you're developing an accessible procurement model on your campus. And I'm sure many of us already have some sort of accessible procurement model in place, given that there's many accessibility professionals and procurement professionals in the audience today. So we have some keys to success and some challenges, but really, you know, if you're developing a new model or changing a model, there's things that you have to keep in mind to make sure that it's successful. If you think about change management in IT, there's some things that you can do to help you with that process. You know, there's obviously a sense of urgency around accessible procurement. There's lots of risk, and there's things that we should be doing for due diligence for our institutions. And you want to make sure that you involve all the stakeholders on your campus, have them involved in developing the processes and finding the friction points and things like that as you move along. And we'll show you the parts of the accessible procurement process as we move through this presentation. And you know, if you can, it always helps to make things easier or consolidate or include other parts of processes and sort of bake it all into one process, so there's less things for people to consider. So on the next slide, a little bit more about what we did at Cal State LA recently. We've had an accessible procurement process in place. We recently revised that process and modernized it. And, you know, as I mentioned in the previous slide, we had to involve stakeholders to get that on the go, telegraph expectations about why we were doing this and you know, the efficiencies that it would provide. We moved our accessible procurement process into a ticketing system, and you know, we had executive buy-in to do that and improve our processes. We had some staffing that we had to consider. We had to provide awareness and training on these new procedures to the university community, and integrating other teams into this process as well. And you know, it's interesting because you can plan as much as you, I mean, plan until you've planned until you can't plan anymore, and then inevitably there's always something that comes up that you just couldn't plan for. For example, as we created this new process, as we improved our process, we realized that there was things that we hadn't even considered. For example, some departments across campus were using the old process as a sort of checkpoint for fiscal approval, which wasn't even a consideration in our new process. So there's things that, you know, will crop up, and as you develop things, you know, you'll have to work those out and decide how you want to move forward. And I'll move to the next slide for Cheryl.
Thanks, Leon. So what you see right now is kind of an overview of what we're going to talk about today. This, we divided our process into 4 steps, and we created this process with a group of campuses, small, medium, large, and the ATI staff. And it took about a year to really examine the procurement process and all the variables attached to that to determine where exactly could we integrate accessibility into the process. It really was a challenge because some campuses just thought they could give it to their procurement department and let their procurement department worry about it. And obviously that doesn't work well. So we made a decision early on to put the responsibility for accessibility on the vendor. And of course, we want to put the onus on them, but of course we have to give guidance all along the way. So today we want to share this process and a couple of the tools, the accessibility conformance report, critical review, and our vendor consultation and demonstration. We want to share those tools that are kind of inexpensive to put forth as opposed to doing deep testing on your campus. So what we'll be talking about as we go through is our steps. Step 1 is gathering the information. Step 2 is reviewing the information. Step 3 is reviewing the actual product and then placing the order. And I'm not going to go through what's attached to each of these at this time because we'll be doing that going forward. So in addition to actually articulating the process, we also had to look at the roles and responsibilities, which would be the next slide. I would imagine most of you have had the challenge of who's going to do what and how much work can you actually add to everybody's job. So I think it's really important to have the executive support. If you don't have that, you're really only going to have a grassroots effort, because executive leadership is really necessary to get the buy-in across your campus when you implement, when you integrate accessibility into your procurement process. It's going to slow it down, and that's going to cause problems. So you really need, excuse me, your executives to pave the way for that, as well as adding tasks to job descriptions or understanding that new positions need to be hired, so funding is necessary. And it's a really collaborative effort. If you're lucky to have accessibility professionals, that's great. They can do a lot of the work, but they can't do it all by themselves. They need the help of the purchase requester. They may need help from IT staff. Of course, the procurement department is there to make sure everything gets done. And disability services is certainly a partner when you're creating that equally effective alternate access plan. So it's really several different things. We have actual processes that need to be articulated, and then we have to have people to actually do those processes. So let me turn it over now to Sam at GoReact, or Hyrum, I'm not sure which one, and they'll talk a little bit about how this works at GoReact.
Thanks, Cheryl. Yeah, so I'll just give a little bit of history, picking up kind of where Sam introduced us. Back when we were a startup company, there was just a few people working at building our software out. And as you know, when you're trying to get a company off the ground, you sometimes have to just do the bare minimum. And we did not have people who were well-founded in accessibility. So as the company continued to grow, we started to get bigger and bigger deals for our company, which with that comes bigger requirements. And it became clear that we had some accessibility needs in the company that were not being met. Fast forward to where I guess my part of the story starts. I joined the company in 2017, and I had done accessibility work at other companies. And a lot of my background was in computer science and user experience design. And I knew that it would be an exciting adventure joining a startup, and I was excited to get back into a small company again. But we had a lot of work to do, and right as I joined, there was a project to take a pass at fixing some of the accessibility. Now, we knew we couldn't do all of it in one project. So we did go through and try to find what things we could fix at that time that were reasonable. And then we made a commitment going forward that all of the designs, all of the development work, and the things that we'd be introducing into the product going forward would have accessibility as a consideration. Just like you hear mobile first design, I think accessible accessibility first is an important thing to keep in mind. So we took a pass, we did some things. I was still limited in my ability to make change there because we were so small still at the time. It was just me, and I had other responsibilities in addition to the accessibility needs. So we continued to build new things out over the years and tried to make sure that each of those things were accessible. Our needs and questions about accessibility continued through the years to grow. And as we continued to grow as a company, we made a case for growing the product team. And so just this last year, we were able to add 4, I guess it was really 2019 and 2020, we added 4 more employees to the team I'm on. And by doing that, it enabled us to start spending even more time making sure that we were doing the things that we needed to do. And we started to have more serious conversations with the development teams. We split our development teams, and we really had one group of developers at the start, and we added more. But as we began to scale, even more so this last year, we want to make sure that accessibility is baked into everything we do. And it's really exciting for us. So I'm able to add 2 more employees this year to my team. We have one of our development teams who is dedicated to kind of owning the architecture and the processes on the development side of making sure that our product is accessible. And then our product managers and UX designers and myself are helping that coordination to make sure that we're continuing to do the things we do. As our needs have grown, and as we worked with CSU and some of our other big partners and schools, we decided it was time. We needed to pull the trigger and do that third-party audit and get a VPAT that wasn't just kind of our best effort internally. So we reached out, and we're in the process of that right now. We've been continuing to address the findings that are coming back from the audit. So that's been really exciting to see the good things that they're finding so that we can address them for our customer base. And then as we wrap up some of those short-term fixes, we will get our VPAT updated, and anything that we don't get updated as part of that will be part of our accessibility roadmap and plan, and I'll touch on that later in another slide as well. And so some of the things that we're also looking forward to doing this year is really making sure that we have automated accessibility testing as part of what we're doing, so that our code, before it goes out into our product, there are certain things that can be checked by the development team. There are also manual checks going on. And really this last bullet point that for me is, as a company, I'm really excited that we're finally to a point where we're being proactive about accessibility instead of reactive. I don't want to wait for somebody that we're working with to ask for a certain thing, or wait for a student to have an accessibility problem before we address a specific issue. So we still have work to do, I think, like everyone else, but we're making progress. I'm excited for the growth that's happening within our company, and the dedication that our executive team is giving resource-wise, so that we can continue to make great changes. So that's our story on how we got to where we're at, and yeah, excited to see where we go.
So our next slide is the accessible procurement process for the campus level. And if we move one slide more, you'll see that we have step 1. And on the first step, this is really about your process that you've designed to gather all the information about the IT products or services that you're purchasing at across campus. And, you know, at this point, we're asking requesters to start following our procedures and our processes. You know, we have IT, we have our information technology consultants across different colleges. We have the requester that wants the IT product or service. And then we have the procurement department that is requiring that the purchases go through this process in order to be legitimate to when they reconcile purchase P cards and things like that. So the first thing we do is we sort of ask the requester just to do a little bit of due diligence, and oftentimes it's simply thinking about accessibility of the product that they're looking at and see if there are any competitors. Ask the vendor about the accessibility of their product. When you do something like that, that's usually enough to sort of spur a conversation where you can then ask for documentation for accessibility conformance report. And at that point, it's pretty obvious if you have a vendor that is aware of accessibility, or perhaps a vendor that doesn't have the required documentation. So we do ask the requester to do a little bit of legwork, and it's not much. It's really just proactive thinking about things and asking a few questions, usually with their sales rep initially. So we ask on our form, we'll start asking information once the requester completes it about, what is this product for? What do you want to do with it? Who will use it? And on the next slide, we'll get into a little bit more detail on some of those questions that we ask on our form. And at Cal State LA, like I mentioned, we have this in our ticketing system. So the sort of information that we ask is, functional performance. What are you going to use the product for? Who's going to use it? Where will it be used? Is it required? Who is the audience? Is it students, faculty, staff? Will it be seen on the web by the public? Is it an annual renewal? These are all things that we ask on our questionnaire or our ticketing system. And this helps us to, model the impact of the product and decide how much review the product will receive. And you'll see more information about that later in the presentation. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see there's just a screenshot there of how we've implemented it at Cal State LA. We use ServiceNow for our IT ticketing solution, and there are lots of other solutions out there that do the same sort of thing. So we designed what we call our ITC purchase approval request, and this is where the requester starts. So in this product, we ask all the impact questions and get the information on the product. We ask for documentation, which can be uploaded to it, such as ACR. We loop in various departments across campus through workflow. We include our IT liaisons for each of the college areas, depending on where the requester is. And then in this process, we've also, like I mentioned earlier, we've also sort of simplified it in a way, even though we're asking for a lot of information, because we've also baked in accessibility and infrastructure into this process as well. So all three, accessibility, security, and infrastructure, are all parallel workflows that come from this form. So it actually makes things a little bit easier. And I'll hand it over to Cheryl for the step 2 of the process.
Thanks, Leon. So after step 1, we know what the product does, which might seem like, well, why wouldn't we know that? Well, in our experience, at least in my experience, I often get applications that I have no idea what it does. So making sure that that's documented is really helpful. And then the audience, of course, is helpful as well. And how broadly will it be deployed? And those items help you prioritize your efforts. Even though we've been doing this for several years, we still can't review every single thing that's purchased or acquired through information technology. So what we've done is developed a prioritization framework, and I will talk a little bit about that, and it's on the next slide. So early on, we knew that we wouldn't be able to review everything. So we came up with a 5-step approach. We, have hundreds, actually thousands of IT products across the system. So here in the Chancellor's office, we actually have hundreds that are deployed not only within our office and to the public, but also we purchase for all of our campuses. So at the first step, we want to look at assigning a risk factor, which is based on impact and probability, where impact is the likelihood of significant barriers, and probability says, are we going to have any consequences because these barriers apply? And part of understanding the risk is also looking ahead at what we need to do for alternate access, and that will, of course, involve our equally effective alternate access plan. So after we understand the impact and probability, then we can assign a risk level, high, medium, or low, which then we're going to use to determine the type of review that we're going to do. But there's another thing we need to consider, and that's in the third step, which is determining the campus capacity. You may want to review everything. You may want to review high and medium, but if you don't have the capacity, which means the people to actually do the work, then you're still going to have to even look at your risk more critically and cut that number down. And then setting your priority level in terms of the review type that you're going to do and what's the risk to the campus. And it's really important then to move to step 5, which is write down why you made the decision that you did, because that will help you if you ever have an OCR complaint or other types of litigation, that these are the steps that we did. This is why we did it this way. And if you don't have the resources to do as much as you would like to, at least you know that and can be hopefully making a plan to secure those resources. So examples of this, using this prioritization framework: low impact one-offs. People buy a lot of IT products for their personal use or for a very small group of people, and that really doesn't create any risk. So we don't really have to do much to a low impact purchase. Medium impact might affect an important thing, but maybe it's not a mission critical service. Naturally, if it's public facing, we wouldn't want to call it medium impact, and it may create some kind of moderate exposure, but that's where documenting why you made the decisions that you did is important. And then we move into the high impact, which of course would be anything public facing. Super high impact, I think we all learned about public facing from the web accessibility advocate a few years ago that went out and tested everybody's websites and then filed OCR complaints. Public facing, of course, creates significant legal risk. And also, if it's going to be used in the classroom, especially repeatedly, semester after semester, that's certainly high impact. And we want to be sure that we're not denying these critical services to people with disabilities. So if we take into account our impact, then we can look at our review types that are based on our impact decision, and we can kind of bound our reviews to be something that we can manage on our campus. So low impact, we still want the accessibility conformance report, although it may just really get filed. Medium, we look at the critically reviewing, which we'll go into more detail in a little while, obtaining the roadmap, maybe doing some spot checking, manual evaluation. And then at the high impact, we definitely want to have a VPAT that reflects the accessibility of the product. We want a roadmap that has timelines from the vendor about when they're going to fix the barriers that still exist. vendor consultation's a really important aspect here, because that starts to build the relationship between you and your vendor in the accessibility area. And we do that through consultation just to get a decent ACR, and then the accessibility demonstration. And for really big contracts that we do here at the system-wide level, we use the third-party evaluation, which Jeff is going to talk a little bit more about. We found that to be a really impactful tool. And in the big contract world, we ask the vendor to pay for that. We require it. We don't just ask them. And it's really given us a chance to encourage vendors to work with third parties even after the evaluation is done, because they really can fix their product a lot more quickly if they use professionals. So I want to now have GoReact explain a little bit about their prioritization from the vendor perspective.
Thanks, Cheryl. Yeah, so as you can imagine, there's two sides to this. One side is when you're trying to get somebody to prioritize accessibility, and the other side is when you want to prioritize accessibility and you have to convince other people. Either way, it can be a challenge. When you're trying to fit in fixes and feature enhancements and all of the different things that go into a product that make it usable and feature rich and accessible, there's just a lot to take into consideration, and there's always competing priorities. These are some of the tenets we use to determine what we prioritize next at our company. Number one, does it create customer satisfaction? Number two, does it help us acquire new business and grow as a company? Number three, does it help us scale and be more efficient internally? Does it save time and processes? Number four, does it help us differentiate from others we're competing with? And number five, does it reduce risk that our business faces? And the reason why I'm bringing these up in this context is that I believe that accessibility and being accessible actually furthers all of these causes. So for me, on the side of convincing my company to invest more in accessibility, I'm helping the business understand, we have a set of users who have these challenges, and we have another set that have these challenges. As we resolve those challenges, our customer satisfaction goes up. Sometimes people think that building in accessibility is only for a very small edge case of users, and I don't think that's the case. There's a lot of the standards that are out there that just make a product easier to use for everyone. And one example is like font sizes. If the font size is too small, that can affect the majority of your customers. So satisfaction, it helps. Acquisition, as we can show that we're accessible and we have the evidence and the demonstratability of an accessible product, we remove friction in our sales process. We're able to get deals faster and help empower other people to use our product. It actually, there is an investment there that's required, but it gets us more further as a company. It actually ends up saving us time as well as part of that acquisition process and the scaling process. We don't have to justify or rationalize or delay certain conversations. We also don't have to have a whole bunch of different people at the company who can present all of the workarounds, because we are reducing the number of workarounds that are required. It reduces the documentation that we have to make, and it allows us to focus on the things that we want to focus on as a company, because we're building this in as part of who we are. As sad as this is, on the fourth one, accessibility is a differentiation. There's just so many companies out there who have not treated it at all. By becoming accessible and putting a focus on accessibility, you stand out ahead of a lot of people. And so that, I think that's an important thing to note, is that more than just checking a box, it's something that companies can be proud of and point to. This is important to us. This is what makes us different than our competition, is we really want to make this usable and accessible to everyone. And then lastly is the risk factor. I really believe that this is probably a driver for most companies, but it's important. There are lawsuits that can happen. There are risks that come not only for the company that's not accessible, but anybody working with them. And so I mean, clearly nobody wants to have to deal with any type of risk related with accessibility. But I personally, one of my main drivers is customer satisfaction, and that's really where I sell it, is that I think we should have a great experience for every user in every circumstance of our product. And so hopefully these bullet points can be helpful to you as you either advocate for accessibility or as you try to help people understand why they should be advocating for it. So the next question is, okay, my company's agreed to invest into accessibility. We have some time and resources to start working on it. How do we know of this long list of accessibility things that we want to work on? How do we know which way to go, where to start, and how to prioritize that? This is where a third-party opinion can be very helpful. As we went out and got an audit recently, the results come back with a level of severity. We can start on the high level issues and make sure that the things that are the most impactful are addressed first. There's medium low. Each vendor who does a third-party assessment will have a different way of kind of categorizing things. And they'll most likely have multiple ways to perceive how to go about organizing those things. But the reason why I've put check the box here is because as much as going through and fixing all of the things that come through in an audit is important, there are other things to take in mind as you're trying to figure out what should we fix and in what order. Some of the other considerations are how many users are affected in our product with this? How visible is this part of the product? How frequently is it accessed? You know, and then go in and talk to real customers who are having some of those issues. I think it's easy to assume that things are working well, but go watch your customers use your product. Encourage others to watch their customers use their product, and look at analytics and use different tools out there. There's great tools such as Full Story and other analytical tools that will help you give you insight on what are really the most painful gaps in accessibility. And then you of course have to look at the effort to resolve. If you have two high items and you have to decide which one to work on, if one of them can be resolved quickly, of course, do that one ahead of the one that could take weeks or longer to resolve. So there's just a lot of different factors to take in mind, but I think the goal for us is always delivering high quality and an equitable experience for all of our customers, and making sure that is the goal and not just checking the box. Yeah, I'm ready to hand off the next part then. Looks like, was there some questions? Let me just make sure.
Yeah, we're going to pause. This is Christopher. We're going to pause this for a moment, and Rachel's going to read some of the questions in the QA. And if anybody else has questions, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A.
Okay, thank you, Christopher. This is Rachel. Yeah, we did have a couple questions come in. The first one is the priority or risk level numeric, or just a high, medium, low to determine impact?
So I can answer this one. and maybe Leon can also enhance it from the campus side. We really use the buckets high, medium, and low, because once you start doing this, if you try to get too nitpicky about it, you go crazy. So you could use a numeric system if that's more workable for you, but we found the larger buckets to be helpful. And again, sometimes we think something's high, but we may not have had the capacity to actually do the type of review we would like.
Yeah, I think that, one of the advantages of having a real good system in place, such as a ticketing system for capturing this stuff, is that, you really see all of these sort of, which would be maybe low impact purchases across campus. And then, for example, it could be one piece of IT software that's purchased by one individual that is, technically low impact, but then you see it sort of spread, and you now have maybe 10 people across campus individually purchasing it. So, it's sort of dynamic. You can adjust the impact based on, the data that you get from that process. And, you can't have enough data when it comes to that. And you really get to see all of these, purchases that have sort of been on the peripheral, or they've been sort of ignored, or they haven't been captured by that system.
Thank you both. Another question was, do you request that a vendor sign an accessibility addendum for low impact purchases to see if they'll sign it?
Well, vendors are real picky about what they sign, and we take care of any requirements through our contract language writers, which we'll talk about a little bit later. We don't, it's really difficult. I mean, it's kind of a give and take. We're the ones that are going to be sued if there's a problem with their product. So I think that's the case you have to make to them around your requirements. And then a lot of it depends on how much follow through you have. In other words, we have a yearly follow through process with our contracts that calls for additional documents. What progress have you made on your roadmap? So it's kind of just being in their face every year to try to get this progress moving forward. So no, we don't have them sign an addendum specifically, especially for the low impact.
Okay, thank you, Cheryl. There's one more question and then we'll go ahead and move on. So this last question, you mentioned fixing small font sizes. What other accessibility bugs do you prioritize that benefit more than persons with disabilities?
I can start to answer that. There's really just a lot of little things, and there's a lot of documentation out there to kind of review. Obviously, we can't cover all of that today. A couple that come to mind that I think impact everyone include color contrast. If you have poor contrast on the page, it's hard to read the text on the page. It's hard to find where the action items are, the buttons, a lot of different things. So color is a great one to keep in mind that benefits everyone. Another one is making sure that your application works at different sizes. I think it's really easy to assume everyone has the same size computer as you, but if your page can work fluidly for different zooming levels or different, so that it would show up well on a mobile device browser, all of those different things, those are part of accessibility requirements, and I think they benefit everyone. Jeff, did you have anything else that you felt like should be added as a kind of some of those considerations?
No, those are good. One of the other things that come to mind is just the general keyboard accessibility, because that affects all users. I know not everybody's a mouse user. There's some people that are the more power users that like to use the keyboard to navigate around as well. And so for me personally, when I'm in the keyboard mode and then I have to jump back to a certain control and be forced to use the mouse, that becomes quite frustrating. So it's just a better user experience as well. It's not just for accessibility purposes.
Rachel?
Yeah, that seems to end our questions for now. So we'll go ahead and continue with the presentation.
Rachel, there was one question that was answered in writing that I'd like to say a little bit about.
Of course, go ahead.
And that was, who do you use for third-party evaluations? I think this is a really important question, and Hyrum answered for their company. And what we do is we provide a list of vendors we know do a good job. And certainly the one, Hyrum took advantage of our list. And it's really important to try to give some recommendations to your vendors, because we do have some third-party companies out there that are very cost effective, but also the job they do is really not at all informative. So I think that your recommendations for third parties to any vendors that you hope to get one from are made because you know the companies do a good job. Thanks.
And so we come to step 3 in the process, and that is to have our review of the IT product and the accessibility documentation occur from our accessibility professional. And this step is obviously very important. You know, it helps us to, probably the biggest part here is to determine whether we have quality ACR. So I think most of us have experienced the situation where you receive an accessibility conformance report, and it's really, it's not sufficient. It's not completed by the correct parties at the vendor level, or it isn't filled out correctly, or it doesn't really provide any additional information on the accessibility of the product. So, you know, less now, but still it occurs. You know, your ACR really is a wide range of quality, you know, so the review process is pretty critical. So at the campus level, we were able to benefit from the Chancellor's office expertise. We received training at the campus level to apply the same standards to the ACR critical review process at our different campuses. So we have that well defined, and we have our methods to review accessibility conformance reports. And you know, that vendor engagement part where you're asking questions and clarification is pretty important. And I think most vendors, as we'll see, appreciate that. Other parts of the review by the accessibility professional, you know, are to get other documentation such as a vendor roadmap if there's barriers that are identified, so that there's sort of a good faith timeline on when those might be addressed based on the priority or the severity of the barrier. You know, those third-party accessibility evaluations, if it's a high impact purchase that's going to be affecting a lot of people. As you'll see later, we'll ask the vendor to demo their product from an accessibility perspective. This can provide a lot of insight. Even if the vendor thinks that, you know, everything's good and they've done their due diligence, sometimes this can sort of just open up new pathways to discuss accessibility. And you know, automated testing tools, there's a lot of them out there that can be used in this process. You know, the Wave tool, things like that by WebAIM, and manual if required. You know, we do have a set of guidelines that we follow if we have to do a quick interface evaluation at the campus level. And end user testing. And then the whole goal is, of course, to make sure that those accessibility barriers are well defined, and we can use this information to prepare a robust, equally effective alternate access plan, which is a critical step in our review process.
Yeah, so we're going to talk a little bit about what it looks like when you actually engage with a third-party vendor. And this can look different between vendors as well, but ultimately it kind of breaks down the same most of the time. But from a vendor perspective, when we have somebody reach out to us and ask us to do a review of their product from an accessibility perspective, one of the first things we want to do is work with the customer to make sure we're selecting the correct pages or screens to test. And the way we do that is instead of us taking their product and walking through it ourselves, we'll often get on a call. It usually takes an hour or less, depending on the complexity of the product. And we'll walk through that product. And one of the things that often happens is the customer will go into demonstration mode where they're trying to show us what the product does and what it's meant to accomplish and all that, which is good information, but we don't need it at the level of detail that it's usually presented. So we usually have to bring them back in and say, we're actually looking for the different types of screens that you might have or pages that you might have that are all based on the similar template. So if it's a website, typically we can break that down into just a very small set of templates or layouts that's used. If it's some type of compiled software, it's a little bit different. It can usually be a lot more than that, because compiled software and web content are two different worlds. But once we get through the primary scenarios with the users, one of the benefits of doing that live walkthrough with them is we're able to identify and ask questions about certain things we might see on the screen that were not initially presented to us or were skipped over as something that, you know, the presenter really didn't think was that important. And oftentimes we discover that that's actually a key functionality of the site. And so we're able to explore that a little more. And then the other thing we look at too is going through is we can ask questions about the key things, or those critical, what we call user paths or user scenarios, that the purpose, why, the reason somebody would come to your site, what are they trying to accomplish? And what that does is that helps us to make sure that not only are we testing the various pages that represent the site, but we're also testing those key transactions. So when somebody comes to the site, regardless of there might be some accessibility issues on the page, that user can still work through that transaction path and accomplish what they came there to do. So because that's often overlooked by some testers, unfortunately, but that's really important, because not every site or every product is going to be 100% compliant. That's just not a reality, unfortunately, for most products. And so if we can make sure that we're identifying which key parts of the pages and which those transactions paths are really needed to accomplish the primary purpose of that product, and that those are accessible from start to finish, then that's a huge benefit. And that really kind of at that point sets your product above a lot of others that may have some of those blocking issues or some of those issues that make it more difficult for a user to actually accomplish something. Then the next thing what I also wanted to mention too is one of the reasons we do that is because it does help us reduce down the number of screens and pages that we actually have to review, because accessibility testing is largely time intensive. You know, there's scanners out there that you can use, and there's tools you can use to look at various pages and things like that. But to truly evaluate a product for accessibility, it requires manual testing. And it's not just a look at the screen or the page once and move on. There's usually multiple tests that have to be done along with that, you know, from looking at the keyboard, looking at it with a screen reader, different layouts and things like that. So it does become quite time intensive. So using this process, we're able to break down a website that could be hundreds or thousands of pages in size down to anywhere from, say, 12 to 25 pages on average. And what that does is that really reduces the scope, but allows us to dig into the site and produce a report that highlights the majority, if not all, the issues that exist across that site. And so it not only does it save time, it also produces a much smaller data set that's much more manageable to work with. And in the case of web pages, those, like I said, many of those issues are just template issues that can be fixed in one location and move on. So it does cut down the cost and the time involved, and it's a much more effective way to approach it. One of the challenges, though, we find is like I said, when we have a customer or working with a client and they give us the listing of URLs that they want instead of walking through that with us on the live call, at that point we have to go through that, and oftentimes we end up finding that half or more of those URLs are just duplicates of the same thing over and over, and we have to go back and say, no, this let's pick something else that represents this. So that's just something to keep in mind, is how we initially kind of determine what we're testing and why we're looking for certain things. And then the other thing we want to make sure and clarify with the client we're working with is the level of conformance they're targeting. You know, WCAG, if you've not looked at accessibility at all, and then you come in and you say, I'm going to target WCAG 2.1, and you've not even done the basics for 2.0. You know, you're just kind of, it's not a bad thing to target that, but depending on where you are at as far as your level of ability, level of resources and things like that, it may not be the best thing to go for 2.0 right away. You might, I mean 2.1, you might want to actually target 2.0. And then other things too, there could be factors that say that maybe there was some kind of legal settlement that they agreed to do 2.1 or something like that. Then we have to take those into account as well. So we want to make sure that what we're targeting is going to suit their needs and that they understand the impact of choosing one or the other. And we know that WCAG 2.2 is scheduled to be released at some point this year, maybe. So that, again, that just adds more and more on top of that. It looks like Cheryl might have something to add.
I do, Jeff, because from the campus level, I think it's important to identify what the critical functions are in a lot of these applications, because they have things that are critical to the task, to complete the task, and then they have a lot of superfluous other things that should be accessible, but your first objective is to get the task completed. So I think by having the purchase requester or RFP committee or whoever is purchasing the product identify those key tasks, it will also help your third party bound the scope, because some of these really huge applications, your learning management system, video streaming, lecture capture, those have multiple functions that may not all be critical. And maybe if the vendor just goes and, you know, they end up with $100,000 estimate, that obviously is going to put a crimp in how they feel about it. So thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, a good example of that might be something where you have the feature to sign up for a newsletter, but that's not even the purpose of your website. That would be something you want to address at some point, but that's not critical in that scenario. So thank you, Cheryl. So as far as the level of conformance, we help them identify that, because that's important, because that's going to impact how much work goes into doing a review for somebody as well. And the next thing we look at is what environment are they looking for this test to be done. Most of the time, what we find is that customers have no idea. They just come and they say, it just needs to be accessible. And so at that point, we might just jump down to the default browsers, like a Windows system using Chrome or Edge, or maybe a mix of those browsers. Then the specific AT, sometimes the purpose of a particular product is going to go to a group where they know that maybe there's a large number of JAWS users, or maybe there's a large number of Dragon naturally speaking users for, you know, being able to control the computer with your voice. In those situations, then we definitely want to target those specific assistive technologies. But if they don't have a specific requirement around that, then we just agree upon what's the minimum subset we're going to be looking at. And that's going to include mobile devices as well. We've had some customers come to us and say that all our users are on Android. So when we do our testing, we really never test the mobile layout in an emulator. And the reason being is because sometimes what you get in an emulator in that case doesn't really match what you get on a device. So when it comes to mobile testing, we always try to do that testing on a mobile device itself, because that's a real world test, and we'll be able to really identify how that experience is on those devices. But as a general default, if that nothing is specifically required around that, we usually just default down to an Apple iOS device. Generally, they're usually easier to use. Android has come a long way, but Apple iOS, you know, they're still kind of the leaders in that, I guess I could say. So we just default to that because it usually is much more effective. We don't want to be doing unnecessary testing either. And then when it comes to the actual testing part of it, once we've gathered all that information and got everything down that we need, what we do as far as our testing is, I mentioned we have to do multiple test passes, but the very first thing we usually do is we'll do keyboard testing. And the reason that is because keyboard testing doesn't require anything special. As long as you know what you're looking for, and really anybody can do keyboard testing. You go to your site and you start tabbing through the site. If you lose focus of where you're at, you've got an issue. If you get to a control, like maybe a calendar selector, and you can't successfully go in there and enter a date or select a date using that control, then you've got an issue. So we go through and we do all that keyboard testing just to make sure everything looks good and is working well, that the contrast is good on the visual focus on things that we see. And what that does is that keyboard testing really sets the baseline for everything else accessible, in my opinion, because there's a lot of assistive technology out there that it works, but if you don't have that basic keyboard accessibility aspect of it in place, it can often interfere with some of that assistive technology, and you might attribute that to an assistive technology issue when really it's just a keyboard issue. So that's the first thing we do, is we go through and do that keyboard testing, and then we'll move on to things like doing our screen reader testing, and then we'll repeat the same thing when we go through our specific user scenarios or the key user paths to make sure that they're done. And then on top of that, if there happens to be a particular layout that might represent a tablet, then we have to look at that as well on a tablet. But as a general rule, it usually breaks down to a mobile device and what we get on the desktop. And then if the customer has concerns over different browser types, we have to space that testing out amongst the different various types of browsers as well, just to make sure we're covering our bases. And that could also include operating system. We've had some cases where we need to test on Windows, but we also need to do some testing on the Mac. So these are the types of things that we want to clarify when we start that engagement as a third party, before we even start testing. And then the next thing after testing is complete, which is really one of the more time-consuming parts of it, is creating the audit report and then that ACR based off the VPAT, that accessibility conformance report. Now the difference there is our audit report is one where we compile the report and we take each of the WCAG guidelines and we report on whether or not the test sample that we had passed or not. If the test sample had any failures, then we highlight what those failures are. We try to include a screen capture. We try to explain what was expected and what happened, similar to like if you're writing a bug report. We try to include code snippet if appropriate. And if we can, we also make a recommendation on how to fix that. And then we also will include the level of criticality and in two different forms. And what I mean by that is you have how severe a particular issue might be as far as impacting a group of users. So if a particular issue is going to block screen reader users, well, that's a blocking issue. That's pretty important to know about. But a lot of our customers also want to know about, well, what's their risk level from somebody coming by and giving them a legal complaint. So we can also document that as well, because we've done this enough that, and we've looked at it, at least in our company, because we do help with litigation services. We've seen enough legal complaints that you can kind of determine which issues are the ones that are going to get the interest of those drive-by plaintiffs and might put a target on you as a potential place to file a complaint. So we'll address all those as well. So we do try to give quite a complete picture, and to allow you to not only understand what the issue is, but why it's an issue, what you can do to fix it, and how critical it is for you. Because one of the things about the audit reports that we create at Converge Accessibility is we try to use that as an educational tool. So it serves the purpose of identifying those issues, but we also want to educate our customers, because it's important that they understand. And when they start to understand, we see too that it's a lot easier for them to adopt accessibility into their overall development process, because they start to see the benefits and see how it really impacts people. So it's really just more of an educational thing that can trigger that. So we always try to do that. And of course, after we provide that report, we give our customers time to consume that, 2 to 3 weeks, and then we do a follow-up review call with them to let their designers, their developers, their QA people, whoever it might be that still has questions, get on that call, and we can walk through those and discuss them and clarify and help them understand better how that works. That's not something all third-party vendors will do for you, but that's one of the things that we do try to do, and making sure we're empowering our customers in that way. And of course, the accessibility statement, that's something that's often overlooked, but in the CSU world, that's actually something that's required. And so we will talk about the need for an accessibility statement and how to properly create one. And those can get quite detailed, or they can get quite basic. So depending on where you're at, we can discuss, okay, what do you need to start with to at least help you? The other thing an accessibility statement does is it gives you the ability to document your current issues in the product, accessibility issues, whether or not there's any workarounds, the impact it might have on users. So similar to that audit report, but at a much higher level, so that you can put that publicly on there. And the other nice thing about an accessibility statement too, that also helps lower your risk of some of these drive-by illegal complaints as well. And then another thing that we offer at the end of all this is remediation testing. Not all our clients take advantage of that, but the ones that are usually serious about accessibility, they want to go in and address the issues that have been discovered, they will usually come back and say, hey, we would like this done because now we fixed all these things. We want to make sure we fix them correctly. And so we can go in and do that follow-up testing just to verify that they've addressed those things as they should. Then the next slide, Converge, the benefits of a third-party review. So I know Hyrum was talking a little bit about some of the benefits already, but what we find is some of the highlights that we can throw out there is why you might want to use a third-party review, even if you already are doing accessibility testing in-house, is because one of the first things it could do is identify the accessibility holes in your testing process. And we see that quite often, where we work with a company and we got our testers and they've done this and they've signed off on everything, only to come to find out that they haven't really, one of the biggest ones, again, is keyboard testing. They didn't do any keyboard testing. So they think everything's great because they've used the mouse and they've used the scanning tool to test all this stuff. But then you start tabbing through their site and immediately you start hitting blockers. And that's, I hate to say it, but that's something we come across more often than anything. So identifying the various accessibility holes, that's just a huge value add when you work with a third-party vendor. And even if it's just a one-time engagement, sometimes a lot of our customers will at least have something done annually just to make sure they're staying on track. Another benefit you get from that is you get an unbiased analysis. And what I mean by that is if you're internal and you're doing things, usually the people you have reviewing your site or your product in-house, accessibility might not be their only job. And so they have a lot of other things going on that they have to address every day. So getting somebody to look at your product, that's what they do for a living, you're going to get a much thorough review and there's not going to be any bias in that. They're going to tell you the way it is. They don't have to worry about what management thinks or somebody else might think, hurting their feelings, right? Because that's what they're getting paid for, is to do that. And in so doing, once you work with a quality vendor that gives you all the information and helps you understand and tries to educate you in that way, it really does help you better understand not only what accessibility means and the impact it can have on different groups of users, but it also helps you understand those accessibility guidelines. And those guidelines within themselves, if you've looked at the WCAG guidelines and read through them, chances are you found some of them to be very vague and very confusing and not realizing, well, how do I really apply this? So by working with a third-party vendor, they can also guide you in that way and kind of help you understand what these things really mean and how they really should apply. And one example of that, I would say, is I recently had a customer come back and ask questions about a phone number field, edit field, when they were typing in the phone number, and they were saying that JAWS wasn't reading it right, but they had another accessibility consultant that was telling them that it has to read as a phone number. But that really wasn't the case, because we were able to show using other screen readers how each screen reader does it a little bit differently, and nowhere in the accessibility guidelines could we find that it required JAWS to read that number in a certain way. So it's a good thing to have if you can do it, but what was happening is they were putting too much time and effort into something that they really had no control over at that point. So we're able to help them identify that and understand how to move forward beyond that. And then the other thing, the benefits you can get is it provides insight on the various user impact that you might have, because when you help somebody understand that accessibility is more than just about the blind user community, that you have people with a lot of different other needs out there, that can be an eye-opening experience too, because oftentimes people don't think about something like color contrast. They might think, oh, hey, blind users don't see that, or maybe even a skip nav link. Well, isn't that for blind people? Well, no, keyboard users can use that too. So when you tab to that skip nav link, it should be shown visually, that type of thing. And of course, another benefit is those types of guidance and suggestions that a good vendor can provide, because oftentimes there's so many things out there on the internet that can give you guidance, but again, they're not always that clear either, and sometimes they contradict each other. And so when you're working with a vendor who understands what your product is trying to accomplish, they're in a better position to actually provide you that guidance and suggestions on how to approach accessibility in different ways that you can implement. And in the long run, it really helps create an overall better product, a more usable product for your users. We talked earlier about, keyboard being one of the basic things, accessibility being one of the basic things that benefits everybody, not just somebody with a need. For example, if you're using a wireless mouse and your mouse goes out and you're in the middle of filling out a form, well, it sure is nice to be able to complete filling out that form before you have to go off and search for batteries for your mouse, or if your mouse just lost connection, rebooting and losing everything. So things like that. And of course, the last thing on our list here is the VPAT, or that accessibility conformance report. One of the things we find that when we see these types of reports come in that have been filled out by the customer themselves, it oftentimes is just yes, 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 we support everything, or they change it into some type of marketing tool. And that's really not the purpose of that ACR, and it's not really beneficial to anybody. So working with a quality third-party vendor, they should be able to help you to accurately fill out that accessibility conformance report and add in the various details that an organization like CSU is really going to be looking for, because not everybody's technical, not everybody has the time to read through all the audit reports that might be created. So that VPAT, that ACR, serves as that high level summary, and you have to be able to identify and be honest where your issues are, if there's any workarounds, what types of groups, which users they might impact, and possibly even note what your future plan is or timeline to address some of those issues. And that creates a quality ACR, and that alone can help you stand out from some of the competition, because I can tell you one thing is the different ACRs I've seen, VPATs and ACRs, they you can look at two and compare them, and you can know which one actually has a little bit understanding about accessibility and did their due diligence compared to somebody who hasn't. So that's a big identifier that can come back to bite you if you don't do that correctly. And we can move on to the next speaker then.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, so just a quick overview here of the documentation required for the high impact review at the CSU. Obviously, we want our accessibility conformance report, whether it's filled out by the vendor or a third party. That's the huge important piece, and the quality of that documentation says everything. If we have a good quality ACR, oftentimes getting the accessibility roadmap isn't too much of a heavy lift. We actually have a template that we provide to vendors if they don't have one, just to help with that sort of good faith effort of here are the barriers and this is what we need to address. And this is our development timelines. Of course, the accessibility statement, another piece of documentation that really is, for the end user, so that they can know about this stuff in advance. A good accessibility statement will really be clear, concise, and it'll let people know up front what the issues are, so that they can make an informed choice about how they're going to access this product, and maybe avoid some of that frustration right off the bat, instead of a sort of aspirational statement, which you see in a lot of these accessibility statements, like we follow WCAG and we do this and we aspire to this. And of course, the product accessibility demonstration is another key piece of the high impact CSU accessibility product review documentation, which gives us a real insight into all of this documentation that has been provided by the vendor. Does it align with the information that's in all of these documents? Are there gaps? Is there anything that hasn't been found? And again, if we move on to the next slide just quickly, A good accessibility conformance report is going to have all of the essential components that we look for. When you review this documentation quickly, you become a pro at determining whether this ACR really isn't worth its salt. You want to make sure that the remarks are there, the level of support is there, and that the vendors provided proper remarks and explanations as to how they got there, how they supported it or supported it with exceptions, or if there are barriers, what are those barriers, and are they affecting the core functionality of the product? So a complete accessibility conformance report has the level of support, how it's supported, how that was validated, and barriers if they are present and how they're complete. And oftentimes we have things that we want to make sure the vendor completes in the ACR. We'll ask for certain things. Sometimes we don't get it all initially up front. We do want to see Chapter 3 and the 508 VPAT, the functional performance criteria, Chapter 5 software, and we want to see Chapter 6 software support documentation and services as well. So with that, we'll move on to some examples of ACR with Cheryl.
Thanks, Leon. So this would really be how do you get with the vendor to get those answers that we really wanted, like how it was evaluated, what barriers still exist. So, and this will actually also go to your hands-on activity in a few minutes. So when we review a VPAT, it almost always is not sufficient when we get it. There will be answers like the one on this slide, which is regarding the accessibility of the keyboard. And a vendor might say it's partially supported, and then they say things like most or a few interactive elements within the application can be accessed and invoked with the keyboard. And you're just like, well, that's great. Are those the critical task areas that can't be operated by the keyboard? Or is it you can't go to Facebook via the keyboard? Or what exactly is the problem? So when we do this, we put an actual extra column onto the ACR that the vendor gave us. And we put questions and comments into that section. And we send it back to them. And so we're asking for more information, but it also often opens the door to a consultation because they get our document. They're really not sure what to do with it. So it gives us a chance to meet with them and explain why we need them to do it this way and what exactly they need to do. So our review note in this case would be describe the navigation and where the barriers are. So if we go to the next slide, we have an example of what we would consider a good remark. So instead of just some interactive elements might not be operated by the keyboard, the partially supports really points to drop-down menus, the header section, and within some of the questions, the interaction isn't working so well. So in that respect, when you get that kind of answer, and they also transfer that to their roadmap, there's a plan to fix it, and you also know what you need to address for alternate access. So I have one more quick example here, and this would be from the 508 section. Now, if you use the 508 version of the VPAT, which I believe is 2.4 right now, specifically 508, you have the functional performance criteria section, Chapter 3, which is really, really helpful because it brings together the WCAG tables and really asks the question by disability group, can this disability group use this product? So when a vendor answers the question, for example, around limited vision, and they say it's operable by users with low vision and provides functional support with screen magnification. Well, that's good. How did you figure that out? In other words, how did you evaluate it? And how did you, if it's partially supported, where are those barriers? So a more acceptable answer would be on the next slide. The partially supported rating was given because you can't raise the text to 200% on homework messages, student dashboard, and there are also some color contrast problems related to contrast luminosity ratio. So if the vendor hasn't really explained that they enlarged it to 200% for 2.0 or 400% for 2.1, and how they evaluated it and that there wasn't this loss of content or functionality, then that's something you really need to know. So again, this is a really kind of an cost-effective way and for you to get the information you need to know. And also, I believe that we need to raise the bar on the accuracy of the accessibility conformance report. It's not okay for them to give you wrong answers about other questions or misrepresent what the application does. So it really shouldn't be okay for them to misrepresent the accessibility of the product either. So I hope that this can help you move your accessibility process forward. It's a little laborious in the beginning, but once you do it for a while, it becomes pretty quick to do. Don't you think so, Leon?
Yeah, I think so, Cheryl. I think, that's probably the biggest lift initially, is to get the expertise and the capacity at the campus level to really do a thorough job of this review, because, if you don't prioritize based on the capacity that you have, it can get overwhelming pretty quickly. You're getting these left, right, and center. You have to decide where you're going to spend your efforts. And we're fortunate that we have a sort of system-wide CO community of practice, central expertise through Cheryl at the Chancellor's office level across the whole CSU.
And we also have mentored a lot of campuses around this area in procurement, and we're always happy to help you if we can. So now I'd like to move on to the hands-on activity, which will also be combined with your 15-minute break. So in the packet that either was mailed to you or you accessed through the link, there is a document entitled Hands-on Activity. And it's a list of just a brief, I think six items from a VPAT with comments that we've received from vendors that really aren't sufficient. So if during your break you want to consider what you might ask about the comments that are on that document, that would be great. And when we come back from our break, we can you can put your comments in the chat if you would about what your thoughts are. So I think it's a good time for a break, and we'll see you in 15 minutes.
Thank you, Cheryl. This is Christopher. We've got in the chat to come back in 15 minutes. So that's 12:45 US Eastern Standard Time. So enjoy the break. Hello, everyone. This is Christopher. We'll be starting in 2 minutes. So grab the water, the tea, the coffee, whatever it may be, and we'll be back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone. This is Christopher. Cheryl, I'm going to ask you to come back on.
I'm here, Christopher. Thanks.
Good to
So
see
let
you.
me just say a little something. This hands-on activity, we've done this this type of pre-conference session many times, always in person, and this is usually a group activity. So I think it might be kind of boring on your own. So I will say, if you had any questions about it, you can put your questions or comments into the chat, or questions into the question and answer. But I just want to encourage you to, start insisting that your vendors really give you a valuable accessibility conformance report. So moving on, I would like to now turn it back over to Leon to talk about vendor engagement.
Thanks, Cheryl. Yep. So obviously the vendor engagement is something that pays off. I think we meet vendors that, regardless of the product impact, well, I mean, medium or high, we really meet vendors that are all different levels of accessibility expertise. And, in that process of our critical review, where we're asking for a quality ACR, we find vendors that are just not aware of, accessibility in general, or they're just overwhelmed by the VPAT document itself. I mean, keep in mind, this is a document that is designed to be filled out by the vendor, and yet it is, like 60 pages long. And, oftentimes we have vendors that are having the wrong people fill those out, or, the salespeople think they can handle it, So the vendor engagement, to sort of really let your vendor know what you're looking for, what the point of a quality ACR is, and the fact that, dispelling the myths around VPATs or ACRs. You can have a great VPAT that shows a lot of accessibility problems. The whole point is that the VPAT needs to be a quality document that actually provides value, so that we can see where we stand from an accessibility perspective. I've heard people say that it's a bad VPAT because because the product has accessibility problems. It's a great VPAT if it says what those barriers are, and we can take it at face value. There was a question that I had about, do you take the VPATs with a grain of salt? I think really you should take every VPAT with a grain of salt. That's the whole point of this vendor engagement and our critical review. You do need to sort of, trust but verify, I think, is probably something you could say. So do have those checks in place so that you can just check a few key areas of the VPAT, even if it's, one that looks relatively good, make sure that it's complete. So the vendor, once they buy in, the relationship is just as beneficial for the vendor, I think, as it is for our system. Many times we've had a vendor complete a VPAT, and I think we've told them that this is something that you'll get at other institutions, other universities in our system across all the campuses, and other higher education institutions as well. So the time that the vendor spends on these things is not in vain. It will pay off in many different ways. And if they go for that high standard, then they'll be in good shape everywhere else. And finally, it's really about our due diligence as an institution, to make sure that we are, like Cheryl said, that we're sort of requiring a higher standard for these documents, because there is a huge range of quality. And I don't think that's really going to change anytime soon. It does seem to be getting a little bit better, but it's something that we have to be aware of. And so the vendor engagement is a really, really important part. And I think pretty much all of the engagements we've had with vendors, bar maybe one or two, I think has been a great outcome. Even if it starts a little bit in the beginning where it seems like a real heavy lift, I think eventually most vendors realize that this is something that will benefit them greatly. With that, I'll move it. Did you have anything to add, Cheryl?
I wanted to make a quick comment about vendors who don't want to cooperate on any of this. In other words, we've had a few that don't want to do an ACR. They don't want to do anything. And actually, we've been fortunate. We just don't buy their products. And I know that's hard, but I think it's really necessary when they can't even make the initial effort to participate in this. Thanks.
No, and just speaking from the vendor perspective, that just sounds ridiculous to me. That I don't know why someone would do that to you. That's why I didn't do that to Cheryl, and that's why Cheryl and I have worked together for a little while, and why she invited us today, because there are some great benefits to working with an organization like the CSU, or really any organization. When we initially started with the Chancellor's office, understand we have already been working with a number of the individual campuses at varying levels, but this really was a collaboration of all those efforts coming down into one to centralize that through the Chancellor's office. And what that really helped us do is, I like to say, going from good to great. We've worked with hundreds of colleges and universities, and we had a VPAT that we felt was sufficient. I think in Cheryl's example earlier was more of that first round, and she walked us through that same step. And so we have a much more robust VPAT now, but we're still always updating that and improving that. In fact, Hyrum already mentioned, based on our third party audit, we're going to be updating that as well. So we have really felt as an organization, even though our VPAT was accepted, and our initial response to Cheryl was, we're confused because so many other colleges have been fine with this. And she reminded us, she goes, that's nice. I'm going to take you from good to great. And that really helped us understand the value of really having an accurate and more detailed VPAT, on top of just an overall approach to our vendor relationship. Making sure that we're not just being a minimum standard, but that we are exceeding what some may perceive as minimum, which actually should be more of what the standard is. I think when it comes to working with an organization, you really want to be that organization that is setting the standard, that is holding vendors accountable, so that we don't have these varying levels of what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, that we have a better standard. And that's one of the things I really enjoy about partnering with the CSU, is they are, one, the largest educational institution in the country, but they also, because of that, they set a standard in many areas. And if we can meet their standard, I don't think there's anyone we won't meet anywhere else. And so I've appreciated the partnership we've had, because it's really helped us to raise that level and to be that new standard that we want to approach with all of our clients that we work with. And of course, from a vendor perspective, working with organizations like CSU helps us to network with other organizations and also educate them. When we do go through and show them our VPAT and we go through our audit, we're showing them what vendors should be meeting in terms of the needs of accessibility and such. And so when they can also now take us and hold other vendors to that same standard as well. And so that's a lot of my hope that I look to benefit. Ultimately, though, from that vendor perspective, my goal is always a partnership. I hate being client and vendor, even though there's a buyer and seller relationship always there. Sometimes that can be kind of more controversial. Where it's a partnership, I have so appreciated the partnership I have with the CSU because, we've mentioned this many times today. No one is perfect. That nothing is 100%, and the purpose of that partnership is the intent behind it. Are we striving for that? Are we working together? And if you are ever in that relationship where it's just that headbutting and you don't have that collaboration, it makes it very difficult. And so when you can find those organizations that you can be a partner with, it just makes that road and that path so much easier. But ultimately, as we're all working together, we're going hopefully as a body of educators or whatever that may be. We're taking the standard from good to great. So that's definitely perspective from my end on the benefits of partnering with CSU and other organizations. I know Converge also has a perspective on that. So I'll go ahead and pass the baton over.
Yeah, so I certainly echo all of Sam's comments as well. Some of the things I appreciate about being able to work with CSU is that they do set such a high bar when it comes to accessibility, where other organizations just really just checking a box. The fact that they require an accessibility conformance report with the detail that they do is super beneficial, and it really highlights what that report is, how it really should be used, honestly. And so that's a great thing. And that they require a product walkthrough before they purchase anything is that's another thing that sets them apart from a lot of other organizations we've worked with. And what I like about the things that CSU does, it really holds the product vendors accountable. And that's really where it should start, in my opinion, is the product vendors really need to understand that accessibility is something that's important, that they need to be working on internally before they even try to sell these products off to everybody else. Typically, the way it works now is an organization will purchase a product and they're told that it's accessible, only to find out later on it's not really accessible, and then they're facing some kind of legal complaint, through these different ways of advocacy that are done today. And I think this is a much better form of advocacy, because now even though it might be a painful process for a lot of vendors to start out with, at least this way the resources and the time that they're putting in, it's not defending a lawsuit, it's actually putting effort into understanding accessibility and incorporating accessibility into their product as well. And one of the things I appreciate about Cheryl herself is she's made me, over the years, has made me a better tester and a much more effective accessibility professional, because she holds all of us to a higher standard, not just vendors, but anybody she works with. And that's been a really huge impact on my career as well. So I want to thank her for that. We can pass it along to the next slide then.
All right. So some of the lessons that I've learned going through the process, as I mentioned, this was my first time doing a third-party audit. I'm self-taught in accessibility. I've had to learn parts of it with other things that I was trying to design and build and support in products. So I don't have a comprehensive knowledge. And I also came in at a time where other people had been doing some of the accessibility. So the things I've learned over time, and then even more in working with CSU and a third-party vendor with this, is that everybody needs a second opinion. No matter, and we've mentioned this, no matter how good you are, you're biased, you're blind in some areas, and there are people who do this for their full-time job, and they're going to help you get to the root of the problems faster. I think it's good to err on this side of accessibility. If you're trying to question whether you should do something or whether it's good enough, err on being more accessible, and don't spend the time spinning your wheels trying to figure out if you have to do something. I think one thing I've learned is just do it, just make it better, a better product and easier to use. Listen to the experts. So they have a lot of great advice. Don't just brush it off. And then I mentioned this earlier on, but it's really important to be proactive. One of the problems I found is with the reactive mentality of I'll just wait until this becomes a big deal. Is you don't know when it's going to become a big deal. You don't know if that's going to prevent you from being sold as for a big deal to another company, or on the other side, if that's going to prevent your company from using a product that you really want to use. If that group is only in reactive mode, there sometimes timing is critical, and we've seen that with COVID. As all of these organizations throughout the world have been moving online, people are adopting software and having to do it in a fast way that they've never thought they were going to have to. And the products that weren't ready sometimes get looked over and passed over. And I think it benefits everyone to just really build that in as part of what you're doing. And then once again, don't just check the box, like focus really on creating great experiences for everyone. So those are some of the lessons that I learned.
And just to emphasize, the whole reason for this exercise is to get that accurate documentation. So we have our ACR with our required areas, Chapter 3 functional performance, Chapter 6 support, the right tables in A and AA. We have the responses, we have all the right stuff. We have a roadmap, we have the barriers, we have an accessibility statement. And then the whole point is that we can then use that to guide a well-crafted, equally effective alternate access plan, which is the next slide there. And that is a really important part of our accessible procurement process. It's sort of the end goal there. If we are using ICT that is medium or high impact and it has accessibility barriers, we want to make sure that we've taken the burden away from the end user so that they don't have to discover these issues on their own. We have a pre-planned institutional response to how we would help someone that may be affected by these barriers, and sort of like a plan that we can act within the institution so that if somebody requires access that is affected by a barrier, then we'll already have our plan in place to make sure that there's no runaround, there's no disparate access to the information or resource. And then also getting some loop back from those equally effective alternate access plans as to whether they've been successful, when they were enacted, some data. So it's all part of your process, your due diligence, your documentation, and ultimately creating a more accessible experience for the end user. We also have our, I think you in the handout, you have a sort of PDF version of an basic equally effective alternate access plan. Sort of, the main tenets of that are, once you have all your documentation in place, then you have an informed way to say, well, here are the barriers, here are the groups that are going to be affected, whether it's low vision, mobility, you name it. And, what is the workaround? The person who requested the ICT, what are the core functions that we're using this IT product for? And what is a workaround for this equally effective alternate access plan that will be sufficient? So these are things that we have a little EAP committee that we get together and we sort of review those EAPs. It's in our ServiceNow ticketing system. It's tied along with the ICT purchase request, and it is reviewed at least annually, along with the product renewal. All of this stuff's dynamic. So I don't know if we've made that point yet or not, but every renewal cycle, our ICT acquisitions go through this process again, and this is when we touch base with the vendor. We see if vendors are doing what they said they would do, prior to this renewal cycle, we update the documentation, we make sure that our EAPs are still valid, and then we make sure that we're moving in the right direction, basically. The next slide is just a reminder of the 508 versus 504 accommodation models. So we're really working in this space in the 508 sort of side of the house, the proactive side. We're trying to get our technology more accessible. We're trying to, think about access to instructional materials before there's an accommodation request. All of this stuff is over in the proactive side of the house versus the reactive side, where it's a 504 accommodation model that's based around that, individual who needs access, and then it's sort of more an individual-centric exercise. So just a reminder there that's where we're at with the ICT purchase accessible procurement process. We're going for that proactive side.
Okay, so we finally have gotten to step 4 where we're actually gonna get the product. It's been a long road. This is the purchasing department has been important in the other steps because they're the ones that can help facilitate the communication with the vendor because they really hold the purse strings. But in step 4, part of their job is to verify that all these things have been done. They have the accessibility conformance report, they have the roadmap, the third-party evaluation, and then in addition to that, we include contract language in our contracts, which then assures us of the follow-up that Leon was just talking about. You might write a contract that's a 5-year deal with a vendor, but we want to check with them on a yearly basis at the renewal date to be sure, or the anniversary date, to be sure that they're actually making progress on their roadmap. And we do that through the accessibility demonstration, which we're going to move to in a minute or two. And the contract language actually has been pretty successful. So we create writers. At this point, I write most of the IT accessibility writers. And also we have we also have it in our general provisions for IT, which are a set of requirements that go with every contract. And it's pretty general in our IT provisions, but it does really start putting the vendors on notice that this is really important. And yes, we're going to enforce this going forward. So if we move to the next slide, I think I pretty much covered what's on this slide, that updated accessibility report, roadmap. We did put an example of our roadmap template in those documents that we sent you. And then we do the accessibility demonstration. So I think that, we've given you the tool around how you can consult with the vendor on better ACR documentation. So this is the other tool that we strongly recommend because it's not expensive and for your campus to do, but you can do it. Just 1 second, I'm sorry. You can do it. I'm sorry. Is there something wrong, Leon? Am I doing something wrong? I know you're texting me.
No, you're good. I just wanted to let you know, Cheryl, that I do have an issue with my laptop charging here, but I think it looks like it's okay now. It's one of these deals where it was just draining the battery, but I think it's back on. So we should be good.
Thank you. You were freaking me out there. Okay. So in our demos, these take about 1.5 hours to 2 hours, and you really need to have a staff member from your campus. I usually like to have 2 people, one person to talk about to kind of steer the demonstration and another person to take notes. And we always ask the vendors to start off with a presentation around answering 3 questions. How is accessibility integrated into their development process, because frequently it is, we built this application and then we decided to test it for accessibility. Well, that means it's not integrated into their development process. So we do like to get a chance to talk to them about that. We like to talk to them about their accessibility training program for their developers, because we do have suggestions for them about how they can get some training for their developers, and then tools that they use for testing during development, which might be as simple as Wave or doing the manual keyboard evaluation. So they usually spend 15 to 20 minutes answering those questions, and then the bulk of the time is really around the demonstration actions, which are listed here, which are pretty simplistic. Operating the keyboard, the interface by the keyboard. And of course, we use our critical path, our use cases, in order to conduct this. So we're looking at the most impactful functions. We want to see a well-defined keyboard visual focus, resizing the application, color contrast. The screen reader portion of it is JAWS or NVDA. We don't really accept the voiceover in this particular demonstration. They need to be able to remove the style sheets to show that all of the information is still there after they remove them. Not necessarily that it is functional, but that you can at least see the information. And then we check to be sure that they placed an accessibility on the product to let the users know what if any barriers are present and how they can get assistance if they need it. So we also actually recently added having them use the Wave tool on their pages for us, which actually has been pretty good. So I would like to turn it over to Sam, and we're going to be conducting the demonstration, but he's going to tell you a little bit about the application, which is really important to know before you actually do the demonstration. So Sam, take it away.
Definitely. And as Cheryl mentioned, normally this is about 1.5 to 2 hours. So sit back and relax. No, we're just kidding. We know we only have about 45 minutes left today. But we also understand, before we jump into the demonstration, normally we always do a demo of the product as a whole, so we see just the whole user experience. So I'm going to briefly just give you an overview of GoReact, and then Leon and Hyrum will go through actually the accessibility demonstration on top of that. But we want you to have some context as to what GoReact is, so that as they're going through the demonstration, you have some insight there. So I'm going to share my screen. I think I can steal the screen sharing away. So let me do that really quick. All right, and move some stuff around. Every time I share my screen, got to move everything around. So what you're looking at is GoReact.com. This is our standalone platform, although we do integrate with any LMS system. So I'm not going to go through the login process, because that's going to vary based on which platform you're using it, Canvas, Blackboard, or if they're just using it directly through GoReact.com. In any case, as I mentioned earlier, GoReact is a performance assessment tool. So it's used in any use case that instructors need students to demonstrate and perform learning objectives in the course. And then they want to provide that effective feedback through timestamped embedded comments. So this is what that kind of landing page is when you log into an account. As this is an instructor view, Hyrum will go through a student view. Looks very much the same, but as an instructor, I see everything. I have different assignments here, and the assignment ultimately is going to be that placeholder where students are going to post their videos. So you can see I have a list of videos here that students have submitted. Now, students can submit these videos using any web-enabled device. So a cell phone, tablet, webcam, laptop, whatever that would be. Once that video is posted, I can click into a student's video. And on the left side here, I'm watching the student's video that they have submitted to me. I have full control of the video. I can fast forward, rewind. I can even watch it in a faster speed. We also do have auto captioning for any video that is on GoReact. So that would allow any captioning to be for audio or video that is going to be part of that for either asynchronous or synchronous observation. So let me turn that off really quick. And then while I can watch the video, really what we're going to focus on is the right side, and that's the annotation and the feedback. So you can do that in multiple formats. Ultimately, what most people do is text communication. So as I'm watching this, I can start typing at any point. You are doing a great job. Notice the moment I start typing, the video pauses, so my feedback controls the video. And when I hit return, that comment's now embedded in the video, but it's also timestamped at 42 seconds, so we know exactly where that comment was left. And now this is where students are getting that awareness. They're seeing what they were doing, coinciding with your feedback at that moment. One of the things that we even forgot to mention this earlier, I'm an adjunct professor. I teach American Sign Language and Interpreting. So accessibility and accommodations is a big part of my life. And I started using GoReact as an instructor, as a sign language instructor. Even before we had all the technical accommodations, the deaf community ran to this product because you can do video feedback. And this allowed deaf instructors to communicate with students in their source language in sign language and model to students and demonstrate to them ways that they couldn't in text alone. And so while we think that text or captioning is the accommodation that the deaf community needs, sign language is the preferred method. And video, being able to do video comments, I could speak to my student, I can demonstrate or model for them. So we have different feedback options. I'm not going to go through all of them now because we want to get to the accessibility demonstration. But these are just some additional tools we have to make those embedded comments. I can also embed rubrics in here to assess and grade the video. And then there's other marker tools or coding tools you can use as well. So we have a lot of different capture tools, different assignment types you can create. But this will give you a general overview of what GoReact is and how it's being used in the classroom or really in any learning environment. So I'm gonna turn the time over to Hyrum and Leon, and you guys can go through the accessibility demonstration. And so you'll now see this from the student perspective of, and then also how we're gonna go through that process.
Thanks, Sam. So as Cheryl mentioned, when we engage with a vendor and we do a vendor product demonstration, we're really asking the vendor to just sort of step through their own product for us and hit a few items on our list. And we share that slide where, you know, we share that information with the vendor in advance, and we ask that, you know, somebody from the vendor team is able to run a screen reader for the screen reader portion of the test. And this is something that really, you know, provides a lot of insight outside of the documentation for the CSU and for the vendor as well. So we'll go ahead and just go through a couple of these items on our demonstration action here. And of course, the first one, I think Jeff made a big point of mentioning it earlier. The big thing that you can ascertain about accessibility is just a simple keyboard accessibility demonstration. So we asked the vendor to start at the top of their product without a screen reader and just simply tab through the interface. And that provides a lot of information for us. So I think Hyrum's going to do that for us now.
Yeah, thanks, Leon. Yeah, and I appreciate the opportunity to do this. I will say that we know we have some flaws that we still need to address here. So you get to experience the good and bad of where we're at in the process, and that's totally fine. We're totally fine owning where the mistakes that we still have. So as I begin tabbing through here, immediately in the top left, I get an option here that says skip to activity list. That would jump the user down to the list of assignments so they can skip past all the navigation. We have another one here that allows them to skip to the session list of recordings. I'm just going to tab past those instead of enter into those. And then it goes to our logo. And then we have our first navigational item here, which is courses. I'm gonna enter into that. We have a way to go through the past, current, and future courses here, and select a course. This is the course that I'm already on. I'm just gonna stay on that. And so as I tab past this, it automatically closes that, and then I'm able to move to the next navigational item at the top. Now my focus is at the top right over GoReact help. So this is a third-party help tool we have. I'll open it up. It pops down this help tool, which the user can go in here and tab back and forth. They can either search or select one of these top article recommendations. As I tab to leave, this is one of the things that isn't working ideally. It just is looping me through here, so it's not closing it, but I can still get out of it by hitting this dash exit button or by hitting the escape key.
As we move through the product with the vendor, the things that we may call out are, ask them to go into these menus to access these core functions and areas. And, we might comment on things like focus indication, strength, the visual focus, is it really easy to see, and, the color contrast of that and things. And I think Hyrum mentioned that when you escape out of this third-party help thing here, like one of the things that we might note is, well, where is the focus now? Is it not on the question mark where we started? It seems to have gone away. So these are the sort of things that we ascertain from these demonstrations. And oftentimes, like Hyrum mentioned, these are things that the vendor is aware of, but then every once in a while, there's certainly stuff that isn't reflected on the documentation. And that's why this exercise, if you're working on ICT that's high impact, is, really, it's a great exercise. You'll spend just, maybe in 90 minutes or so, and you can just get so much from this vendor demonstration, this product walkthrough, as it were.
Great. Yeah, and so getting out of that help menu, they did have a way, so it wasn't blocking a critical path, but it's not ideal, and so that's something we want to fix there. So now as I tab, it's taking me back to the beginning of the page again. So ideally, it would have picked back up where I left off, and as I continue to tab through, I can move across the navigation, and now it's going down the left hand of the side. So we have the assignments label here. As you move through, we can tab through these different assignment lists in our product, and then really just tab through the different pieces of information and options that are helpful for that user to navigate to the different parts of our application. Leon, should I go ahead and open this video up?
Yeah, let's go ahead and go into that that area there and see how we can interact with it.
Okay, so this is the recording that was previously made. I'll open that up, and then I can see that we have the video, we have the feedback as Sam demonstrated earlier. So I'll just begin tabbing through again. As you can see, we don't have we have a in progress right now that's not completed into our product is some additional landmarks that would help us jump to these different parts of the page. So I am required to begin tabbing through everything. It would be nice to be able to skip. And then another problem that we have right here is once I got partway through that second navigational bar, there's an error and it jumped me all the way back up to the address bar.
Yeah, and these are obviously big things that we would ask the vendor to demonstrate. I mean, we'd be interested in getting to the various areas of the content here, and especially being able to control the media via keyboard, expose captions and things like that via keyboard only. So that this is, you just gain so much from this.
So I'm going to go ahead and just click on this bar because I'm not sure why the loop, what that bug is. It's something we'll get addressed. But if I click in here, it's letting me proceed with my keyboard navigation. So we'll have to figure out what the roadblock is on that. Now it's kind of letting me tab through even further. And now it's hard to see, but in the very bottom left there's a gear icon. That's where my focus is right now. I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And then I'm going to show that I can turn the subtitles on just with my keyboard navigation here. I can mute it. I can do some different things here. This is another one that we need a better way to close that modal when you pop out of it.
Yeah.
It shouldn't stay up, but I can toggle it if I go back.
Okay. And then, so asking the vendor to demonstrate these things via keyboard is huge. We might go on to something else, for example, can you resize the application to 200% and retain the functionality? That's, something that we also ask the vendor to do. Is this an area we can try this, Hyrum? Or did you want to go into this a little bit more? Or?
Yeah, sure. Let me just zoom in. If I can remember my keyboard shortcuts for zooming. Let's see, we'll just, as we go in, by the way, that's just a great, I love the picture of Sam there. He just couldn't have posed better for that. Okay, and so as it begins to zoom in, you can see that the content's having a harder and harder time fitting, which once it gets to where we can't fit it at all, we make a shift like we do on our mobile devices to where the feedback, down at the bottom, we have a new bar that says show feedback. We're actually going to bring some more affordance to that as well. We want it to look more like a button and be a little bit stronger color and higher contrast on the page so that more attention can be brought to that bar. But it does kind of lock down in there so that the user can still access the feedback when they're zoomed all the way in. What we don't want is loss of functionality or something to go clear off the page and not be able to find it when the user needs to zoom in for visibility reasons. We do have, as you can see, the captions size as you zoom, the video is still visible.
Yeah, it looks good. I mean, the captions get larger and, you can still access the components of the interface. And, obviously Hyrum and GoReact, they're well versed in this. They know what their issues are. They've had the third-party review. They're ahead of the curve when it comes to, their accessibility roadmap. But, a lot of vendors, yeah, it will be just such a valuable exercise for them to go through their own product only with the keyboard. I mean, sometimes you think it's never been done before because there's just a lot that's exposed, and it's not unusual for the vendor to sort of get sort of flustered a little bit, and that's a great talking point for us to sort of talk with the vendor and say, now, can you imagine how you would feel if you're trying to access this product as a student and you're also using assistive technology? It just really brings things to the forefront. If you have vendors that are a little bit, they're just a little bit leery of the whole process. They're not completely bought in yet as to why this is so important. I think this exercise is one that really brings it. They have that aha moment, the light bulb goes off. They're like, I get it now. I understand why you're doing all of this.
I think it's better to be embarrassed on the phone with somebody like the Chancellor's office or a third-party company than we had a phone call where a student got stuck on one of our things who had accessibility needs and they could not use it. Fortunately, it was a very small thing. We were able to resolve it that same day for them and provide a workaround as well, and that's been resolved. But there's nothing more scary than a real live user who's trying to do an important task in your product and you don't have an answer for them. So I appreciate being able to be embarrassed in other places, like with Leon instead.
Yeah, and it makes it's a point worth emphasizing that it is a process that we're not trying to make it awkward or embarrassed, but we're just really trying to get that point across. And we try to keep it the atmosphere of a partnership, and discover this together. I think it's keep a positive spin on it, make sure that we're not raising any defenses with the vendor. It's just a really great tool, so that we can get to the end result with as little effort as possible.
Yeah, and I will say that everybody that I've worked with on all sides, they're very polite and accommodating. Their goal isn't to make anybody feel dumb or inadequate, and so I've felt very comfortable working with everyone. That's been appreciated.
So perhaps we could try other parts of other tools that we look at, things like color contrast, things like that. another thing is, we would ask the vendor to navigate to their help area. If someone was interacting with their product and they needed more help, or they needed to ask for help, whether it's accessibility or otherwise, they have a method and a way to enact that. And then finally, we also have the portion where we ask the vendor to sort of go through the keyboard accessibility with the screen reader turned on. And maybe that's something we could look at here now, Hyrum.
Yeah. I'm just going to turn on my screen reader real quick, and then I'll resume my screen share.
And one of the things, another great learning piece when you're using the screen reader is, you're using some of those dialog boxes that are sort of built into screen readers, where you're navigating the page via links, headings, buttons, other elements. If you have a screen reader user that's been using screen reading software for any length of time, they're going to start, interacting with the page a little more efficiently than just tabbing through the entire interface. They're going to use, the page structure to move to different areas. They're going to look for the links directly once they're familiar with their product. They'll know what they're looking for in advance, so it can save them a lot of time. How are things going on there?
Yeah, I think we're good. Yeah, and as you can hear, there's noises going on, and so that's the screen reader. I'll just start navigating through. Does that sound good, Leon?
Let's see. It looks like the video is a little corrupt there. I can't hear anything yet. Give it a shot. See how we.
GoReact dashboard. GoReact University document. Link skip to activity list.
Can you hear that okay?
Yeah, we can hear the video on my end. I don't know if anybody else is experiencing that, but the video is sort of not great.
Let me stop sharing.
Select
sharing one more time.
Yeah, I think there's like a checkbox to,
Yeah, I think there's a checkbox to optimize it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I pressed that. Let me see if this is
menu. GoReact dashboard. Go menu. Yeah. Menu. Address and search.
Is that any better?
It's better. Yeah, it's better.
Okay, so I'll just start navigating through here. Maybe we'll show just some of what we did last time.
GoReact dashboard. GoReact University document. Link skip to activity list.
So maybe I'll jump. Let's see. I'll jump down this time to the activity list.
Main landmark list with 1 items visited link button assigned. Communication/public speaking.
So
communication/public speaking button.
Go ahead.
And we saw your skip nav and things there visually exposed as well. So I might just ask the vendor if they can pull up a list of links on the page or elements. Can you do that, Hyrum? So we can have a look.
I turn off the screen announcements. You want me to have the screen voice over on or off right now?
You can leave it on, yeah, and then just pull up that
elements list dialog.
There we go.
Tree view. Level 0 assignments. Visited 4 of 7.
So we're having a little bug here in the Zoom
elements list dialog,
where we're just seeing a sort of a dark box where the elements box is.
Oh, new share.
Yeah, but
new share.
You know,
Leon, I think the screen isn't shared, the application is.
Select.
Okay, yeah, can you share the entire screen, Hyrum? When you reshare, maybe you'll have to stop and then reshare and share the entire screen versus
it's not
just
giving
the
me all the
application.
options I want.
Elements.
Here's the box. Can you see that?
Yeah. So this is the the elements list that we would have been looking at there exposed on top of the page, and you can see we can see the links. We're looking for the links to be unique, to make sense. We're looking for headings. If we move to headings, we want to see that the headings, their structure on the page,
filter
buttons,
assignment,
form fields. This is
headings radio button checked. All
this exposes a lot of information for the interface and the end user and those that are using assistive technology. You can see there's a lot of buttons there. If we scroll down the list of buttons you'll see there's a whole bunch of stuff there.
Buttons, landmark, but tree view.
And again, this is a way that users would navigate this, and it also, from a structural perspective, it lets us see that we're using the right stuff behind the scenes, that the screen reader is picking up the right stuff. Oftentimes, you might come across an interface product where, the headings are out of order. There's a heading 3 as the first heading, then there's like 2-level heading 1s, things like that. Or you'll have multiple links that have the same description, so it really doesn't help with product navigation and things like that. So again, that's another component of the accessibility demonstration, is to have the screen reader. And again, we go through this for about 90 minutes. And as Cheryl mentioned, the information is sent to the vendor in advance. We really want them to be prepared for this meeting. We want somebody who can run a screen reader. We want to check the core functionality. We want to make sure that, is it the actual product? Is it the real thing that they're demonstrating, for example, or is it sort of a mock-up? That sometimes you come across that with the vendor where it's a mock-up and it's sort of an entirely different experience than you would get at our campus level. So just trying to be as transparent and with all of this in advance really makes it a much more valuable exercise for everybody involved. And from that, we get a lot of good information. So I think that's probably about it then for this little quick demo, a little insight into that product walkthrough.
Speech mode off.
Cheryl, did we have anything to add to that?
Well, I think, from the vendor perspective, this is difficult for them, especially when we introduce the requirement of doing the screen reader, because they may not even have anyone that's particularly adept at running a screen reader at their company. So then they have to scramble around and find somebody to help them with that. But I hope that you could see how this could really expose barriers right out of the box without any effort on your part. Because if it's not keyboard accessible, that's huge. As Leon pointed out, the resizing is a major thing. And if those things don't work, you can be pretty sure there are probably a lot of other things that don't work. So it really has been an eye-opening experience for vendors to do this with us. And also, as Leon said, or Hyrum, I believe, it really helps them understand what a struggle it would be if somebody can't access a part of the critical task of the application. In the one that we just watched, the critical task was just accessing the video for the class and looking at comments that other students have made and those kind of things. So if you can't do that, you really can't be part of the class. Sam, did you have something to add here?
Yeah, no, I think going back to the, what we talked about earlier in the benefits of our CSU relationship is, how many colleges have I sent my VPAT to versus how many have I done an accessibility demonstration with? And most people just take our VPAT for face value, which I appreciate because we're honest with ours, but it's, one thing I loved about Cheryl, and I knew that we were gonna have a great relationship from the beginning, was she goes, this is great, but I'm not gonna just believe you. So you gotta show me. And I love that I got to demonstrate how great the product was. And while we still have our areas of improvement, we got to show that. But it's very easy for people to say, oh, we comply, we comply, we comply. And you to take a VPAT at face value versus just running through a quick demonstration. Okay, since you say you do this, now show it to me how that works. And that's going to really tell you a lot.
Yeah, and I think another really important issue here goes to the effort that your campus puts forth. If you want to do quality evaluation testing on your campus, then that's a really great goal. But also you have to look at what does it take to do that. I mean, you pretty much have to go through several of the steps that we talked about today around knowing what it does, understanding what the critical tasks are, and then you take that information and build your test methodology around it. It turns out to be quite expensive for campuses to be the accessibility company for all their vendors. And that's a big reason that we made the choice to do it the way that we're demonstrating to you today. Is we didn't have the capacity nor the funding to just have testing centers on every campus to test everything that we buy. We do some testing, as Leon said. We might do quick manual testing, keyboard resize, pretty much the things you saw using. We would use the wave tool and whatnot. But that's only effective if you go back to the vendor and tell them what you found and that they need to fix it. If we just do testing and know that there's problems and just tell the vendor where there's problems, well, that isn't really going to move the accessibility of the product forward. So we weren't entirely sure exactly how long the demonstration would take, but we do have a few minutes left, and I did see that we have a few questions. So Rachel, do you want to move into some questions here?
Sure. This is Rachel. We did have a few questions. I wanted to back up to a question that was posted in the chat. I was asking if you would be able to share comments you might put in. What are some questions and concerns? So I think that was going back to the activity when we were on our break, maybe one of those forms.
Yes, I can do that, Rachel. So the accessibility conformance report hands-on activity form, which we really didn't delve into after you guys had a chance to mull it over. The purpose of that activity was to read the comments in the remarks and explanation column, and then based on what we had talked about around how do you know from the comment and the conformance evaluation, how do you know anything about that particular criterion? So if we just take an example of the first item on that list, which is criteria 1.1.1, which speaks to using alt text on your images and whatnot. And the vendor says images are used consistently throughout our product, and that's based on general product knowledge, and they rate it as partially supports. We really have no information about anything there. First of all, they say it's consistently used, but it's partially supported. And it's been my experience that general product knowledge doesn't really mean you know anything about accessibility. So if I were going to put a column on that particular conformance report to say, I need more information, I would be asking, how did you evaluate it? By the way, the conformance level doesn't match your explanation. And if it's partially supported, what are the barriers and where do they affect the user while they're executing the task? And I'll just give a couple of other examples here as well. In 1.4.4, which is resized text, a common thing that some vendors say is, well, the browser takes care of this. Well, no, the browser doesn't take care of it if you haven't implemented it correctly. So then we would ask, how did you evaluate this? Can you raise it to 200 or 400% without loss of content? And how do you support this? Because they choose a conformance level of supports. So how do you support it? Do you have responsive design? What units are you using for your text? And you just have to prod them into telling you how they arrived at that conformance level. So that was really the exercise, to look at the remarks and explanations column that would be supplied by the vendor and say, does this tell me anything about the product? Including if they say supports and they give you no remark or explanation, that definitely calls for, we need to understand how you support this, because when they try to tell you, you get an immediate impression around, does this vendor know anything about accessibility? And often in their answers, you can tell they don't, which helps you do the consultation, bring them into the demo, explain. I think it's really important to explain to vendors, this isn't an exercise in filling out forms. Some of them think that it is. It's just, we fill the form out, we give it to you, we're done. No, people actually need to use this information that you're giving us. We have these alternate access plans so we can be ready to serve our students when they have a problem. So that was really the exercise here, Christine, and I hope that helps answer your question.
Thank you, Cheryl. There is a question out here that Leon indicated he'd like to answer live. I'm not sure if we have yet, regarding VPATs posted on websites that appear to be conducted within the organization and maybe not by a third-party review. And should we be skeptical of those?
Right. Yeah, I actually meant to type an answer, but I hit the wrong button. But anyway, yeah, I can get it back. But yeah, I think that, part of this review process is that, you have a certain level of skepticism for every document that you look at. So, I think the third-party review when it comes to VPATs is sort of the gold standard. But, there are third-party reviews that might not be as good as we would want. Like Cheryl mentioned earlier, there's a list of sort of reputable third parties that will provide a real, third-party review versus some other players that might just sort of be in the space because it's the thing to do right now. But yeah, you should always, look at these VPATs with a little bit of skepticism. And I think once you become somebody who does that, a lot of the time, it only takes a few seconds or a few minutes to just look at that documentation, and you'll know right away whether it's a quality VPAT just based on the answers, the way that it's being filled out. As you become more seasoned with that, there's just a lot of things that you notice that are, apart from the obvious one where the VPAT just isn't filled out correctly. There's other things where they might just, like, in the remarks and comments, they'll sort of state the regs back at you verbatim and things like that. You know what I mean? Just not useful information, but to the person who isn't familiar with it, like, oh, this is very professionally filled out, because it's using lots of jargon and buzzwords. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you, Leon. So the next question says, this process is awesome, but how might this work in a smaller institution with a team of one and not a lot of digital accessibility awareness across departments? Can you share some tips on how you might, for developing a procurement process when we're working with far fewer resources than Cal State?
Well, a lot of our campuses face the same challenge around resources. I think that it's really difficult to really instill accessibility into your procurement process if you don't have that executive support that I talked about in roles and responsibilities. And I know that's difficult. It's really difficult to get that sometimes. So I would say that there are things like the accessibility conformance report, critical review, that someone in your position, if you have the bandwidth to do it, that's another issue for you. I'm not sure what your total job responsibilities are, but that critical review is kind of a starting point for the lower resources that you may have. And you may have success with it, you may not. We have had success with it, but it's really not a one-man show. When we've done effort studies across our system around how much effort does it take to do this procurement process. So let's think about a campus medium size that maybe has 700 IT purchases every year, but 500 of those are could be low impact. So that leaves us with 200 in the medium and high impact area. Well, even that, I can't remember all the specifics around it, but even doing the things like the critical review and the demo and getting the roadmap, those things for those 200 purchases would be 3/4 of a full-time employee. And the reason we did the effort study is some campuses were just assigning this whole job to somebody perhaps in alt media that had a full-time job, but now they can do this other job too. So I wish I had a better answer for you, but it's a process that has to be integrated into your campus with that executive support.
And just to add to that, Cheryl, not at my current institution, but I've been on a campus previously where we had to sort of get this out of thin air. And, I think regardless of the size of the campus, whether it's small, medium, or large, I think you need to have, the charge needs to be there. There needs to be at least an executive that supports this. You know what I mean? And then gradually you can slowly build, capacity. Maybe you're using some students, maybe you're getting a part-time professional, you're doing things to sort of edge it along in a sort of organic fashion, have a higher impact, and then show the value. And it's just something that you have to sort of keep at, and it'll take a while, but you do need that support from somebody across campus. You can't do it yourself.
Thank you both. We have a few more questions in the Q&A. So does CSU generally do vendor demos with high priority products as opposed to medium or low?
Well, low, we don't do vendor demos. Medium, occasionally, and high priority, they're doing the full process. They're doing not only the vendor demo, which is done after the third party, but we definitely would also do the yearly follow-up using the demo on a year after year basis. So and also I think it's important to say we do the vendor demonstration after the third party to try to cover those areas where the third party didn't do a good job. And then we send the vendor back to their third party to do a better job. So that's, yes, so medium and high, definitely not low.
Thank you, Cheryl. And this is Rachel. One last question. How did you get or obtain support for embedding this vendor demo requirement process to purchasing system?
We just did it. When we started working with the procurement department at the Chancellor's office, the procurement folk really didn't have any idea around what we should do. So it was up to us to introduce the things that we thought were important. And, I guess we were pretty lucky that they just went with what we thought. And most vendors don't really complain about doing the demonstration. If you tell them up front, if it's in an RFP, all these requirements are part of the RFP, or if it's just a regular purchase, just letting them know up front, these are the things you're going to need to do. And it's been my experience, they do it, and Leon might be able to add something to that as well.
Yeah, I think that, like Cheryl mentioned, it's sort of well telegraphed. They know what's expected, and it's a great exercise that you get a lot out of for just a little bit of effort. Whereas if you're looking at ACR and things like that, it takes a lot of effort. So if you're talking about what resources do you have, I mean, you should probably think about, how do you spend your resources wisely? Like if you're at that small campus that doesn't have a lot of stuff, that might be the vehicle that you need to sort of start the conversation and make things, work for the accessible procurement process.
Right, I think that's a really good point, Leon. You can flip this or, do it in any order you want. So if you don't have that time to critically review the VPAT, ask the vendor to do the demonstration and review the VPAT while they're doing the demonstration. And that could perhaps save time and give you a starting point.
I think this is Rachel one last time. I don't have any other questions, but we have a few minutes left if anybody thinks of anything. And while you're doing that, I will just mention that our next session 2 will be on March 11th at 11 o'clock Eastern. And that one is only an hour. And that's going to focus on executive leadership buy-in playbook. So I hope you'll be joining us again in a couple weeks for that. Oh, I think I saw a question come in. Let's see. Oh, just some thank yous, eye-opening and excellent presentations, and this will make my life easier. That's great. Thanks.
Well, that's our hope. So we're glad that you enjoyed this. Thank you.
I want to thank all of the speakers, Cheryl and guests. It was excellent. Again, we're going to have this recorded. Rachel's going to be sending it out, and it will be on our archives also as part of the series. So again, everyone, thank you so much. It was really informative, and the 3 hours went by very quickly.
We did have one last question came in, if I could squeeze it in. From Christine, it says, are buyers on your campus willing to have these conversations early on with the vendor? And says, we have trouble with this and often find out when the procurement staff gets involved.
Well, we don't leave this conversation to our buyers. We get involved right at the beginning, as Leon showed through his form and whatnot. We have that conversation with the vendors. And Leon, do you want to talk a little bit about the campus and how you guys are doing it?
Yeah, I think that, you know, we're very fortunate that our procurement department is very vested in this process, and they really look to us to guide them. And, you know, we're on the same page when it comes to all the accessibility requirements, and, you know, anything that is required, they really enforce it. You know, whether it's the contracts or, you know, the buyers asking for things, you know, and again, I think I mentioned that we also, you know, ask the requesters to do a little bit of due diligence up front as well. So like when you're building that, model, you know, you need to have all of these players be part of that, and they need to provide their input, and you need to come to consensus, and then hopefully you can come with a model that'll work.
I think I'll add on to that as well, just from a vendor perspective. I appreciate when we talk about it from the beginning, because it's always going to be part of the process, and it's something that if it isn't brought up until later, it can prolong that process more because we have to go through all of that. So the sooner we can include that in that buying process, the more streamlined it'll go to be able to get that product to the end user as soon as it's needed, versus going through, you know, delays that may be caused if it's not brought up till later on in the process. So I think the earlier you can have those discussions, and I noticed some schools that definitely have their buyers trained, because they'll always bring it up. You know, we're going to need a copy of your VPAT, you know, and all these things. I know they're prepared and ahead of time, and I get that to them right away so we can start that process. But I've also had some that they know nothing about it, and we're ready to go implement. And at the last hour, I get a call from accessibility going, hey, we need to do this and this and that. And now the buyer's frustrated because they need it now, but we still got to go through compliance and stuff. So the sooner the better is definitely, and I think what Leon said, is just integrating that into, this is how we do business. This is how we do everything, regardless of what level it's at.
Yeah, and this is Jeff. Just sooner the better that you engage with a third party if that's your plans as well, because these things usually can't be turned around in a couple of days. They do take some time, and not only that, but if you do identify some serious issues, the vendor needs time to remediate those issues so that they can be competitive.
Well, we appreciate all of you that stayed with us during this time, and you know, we hope you found this to be valuable.
Cheryl, I think this is Christopher. I think everyone stayed. So it's excellent. Kudos. Thank you so much, everyone. And I'm sure we'll be following up. To all our guests, thank you. And to all participants, thank you. Take care. Have a good rest of the day.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. I want to thank the captions too. Thank you all.